hate to break it to you, but everything you've been told may not be correct. At least if that's coming from the statist, from the government, and from their mouthpieces. There's no inflation. There's no supply chain issues, and so much more. What's going on with this? Where are we at in this historical cycle? Are we having inflation? Are we having hyperinflation? And more importantly, what is the cause of our money breaking down, society breaking down, and so much more? I'm joined in the studio today by one of my really good friends, Robert Breedlove. He is going to explain to us from a way that only he can, from a philosophical way. He's the host of the What is Money show. And he has a different way to examine history and explain what's going on right now. And more importantly, where are things going in the near future? He's also going to be speaking at my live event next month in Miami. That's marketdisruptorslive.com. I'll put a link down below if you'd like to come hang out with me, Robert, and 15 of the top speakers in the world that are going to tell you what they think is going to happen over the next couple of years. And more importantly, what you should do to survive it, how to build, grow, protect your wealth, and your personal and financial freedom and sovereignty. Build wealth, build cash flow, protect your assets, protect your freedom, your health, and so much more. Check it out down below, marketdisruptorslive.com, and let's jump right into it with Robert. All right, Robert, I'm so happy to have you back today. We've been trying to put this together for a little bit. Our second attempt, second time you've been back. So anyway, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, Mark, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
So we've obviously been talking a lot of stuff online, and like always seems to happen, some of the best conversation happens kind of before we start recording. I have a lot of things I wanted to talk to you about. Obviously, you host the What is Money show, so you're the guy to talk to about what is money and banking policy. So I want to get into some of these things like Jack Dorsey's been tweeting and what the central bank has been doing in relation to that. But before we go into that, I wanted to talk about some stuff we were kind of going into before we were recording. And we were talking about the way that the world is going. And all of this kind of goes in together. I think a lot of people have been saying, just talk about finance. I don't want to hear about politics. But, you can't really understand one without the other. And so I want to get into the central bank, inflation, all that. But really, it's all about like the central planning. And you were saying something about kind of just being a little bit uneasy about some of these policies that are being put into place right now. And maybe there's some alternative motives or something like that.
Yeah, I think my concern is just, first of all, to your point, you can't disentangle finance and economics from politics in a fiat currency regime, because by definition it is political money. It's money that's being imposed upon you politically, right? Under the threat of force or coercion, et cetera, et cetera. So anyone that's looking for just a pure economics discussion, I would say you should probably just buy Bitcoin and read a bunch of Austrian economics, because you're not going to see it out in the wild today, so to speak. I think that my concern is related to how aggressively some of these policies and mandates are being pushed on people. It just feels like the United States, at least in my experience living here my whole life, felt distinctly different prior to March 2020 than it does since. And there's some shift at the federal level where maybe it's almost like a sense of desperation. Maybe this is, as you've talked about, this convergence of multiple cycles happening all at once. Maybe the state is becoming aware of this, and it's starting to take measures that it would not have done historically. So I guess, in my study of history too, there seems to be this kind of tight correlation between how rapidly property rights are being violated and how quickly things unravel or disintegrate from a political standpoint. And so I see in the world today, clearly the expansion of fiat currency is unprecedented in the modern world, modern post-war era. That is clearly a violation of property rights. We're seeing implications of that, like the shortages, the supply chain disruptions, the unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. I think governments are going to continue to try to fight the very symptoms they are creating with more regulation, legislation, et cetera, and that's only going to make matters worse. So overall, I'm just really concerned about the pace of at which property rights are being violated and the responses. Right? We've and the deception is rampant. Like you see these headlines saying, "Oh no, it's a supply chain disruption that's causing price increases."
Right.
And like on Time Magazine, it's like it's this self-deception that we've seen happen historically multiple times, which usually involves fiat currency inflation of some kind, just sort of taking hold again. And people are caught up in this maelstrom of deception and confusion. And you have all of these cultural issues, right? Where left is pointing at the right, right's pointing at the left, everyone's blaming everyone else, but no one's they're either unaware or not willing to address the root problem, which is the destruction of property. Right? Property rights are the basis of civilization. When you start to erode them, civilization erodes as well.
Hey, hold up just for a second. I want to tell you about something. I just got something cool in the mail I want to show you, and it is this new sleek package I just got with a brand new credit card. This isn't just any credit card. This is a BlockFi credit card that's powered by Visa, and it's backed by Bitcoin rewards. So this is a Visa card. I can use it anywhere in the world that Visa is accepted, and the benefit of this BlockFi Visa card is that I get paid back in Bitcoin. Most of my other cards pay me in some sort of reward points. I get airline miles. I'm not very good at using those. They end up accumulating and I don't do anything with them. But getting to earn Bitcoin back with every single purchase is of course something that matters to me. Now, I know for a lot of people they say that the price of Bitcoin is too high. So I say, well, you can always earn Bitcoin. You can get paid in Bitcoin, or you can just get cash back rewards on every purchase paid in Bitcoin with the BlockFi Visa credit card, used everywhere that Visa is accepted. And if you want to sign up for the Visa card that pays back in Bitcoin from BlockFi, there is a link in the description down below. Check it out.
There's a lot to unpack right there. Talking about private property rights, I'm in Puerto Rico right now in the apartment complex that I'm in, the condos I'm in. The hurricane in 2017, the hurricane took the pool out, and they've been trying to rebuild the pool. And the people of Puerto Rico have been protesting this. No, the beach belongs to the people of Puerto Rico. But they're literally putting the pool on their private property. And so it's made me think a lot about private property rights. And the people are trying to usurp the private property rights of the landowner. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about private property rights, and especially in this context, we're almost really talking about our person, right? So they're regulating us as a person, what we can and even can't do with our bodies. Was that kind of the level of private property that you were thinking about it, or just every level?
Well, you're absolutely right. That is the most private and personal form of property, is you, yourself, your person, your body, your time, the physical space that you occupy. And the property rights that we think of more generally, like your car, your house, these things that you own, that's just an extension of your self-ownership, right? You've taken your self-ownership into the world. You've combined it with the factors of nature in some useful way. You've worked a job, you've planted a garden, you've built a business, whatever. And you've extended your self-ownership into the world in a way that creates value that you then own, right? And you can trade the fruits of those labor with others. So I think of property very fundamentally, that it starts with this inarguable reality of self-ownership, by the way, which is crazy because you can't even argue against it. To try and argue and say, I don't believe in individual self-ownership, I believe in whatever socialist policy, you're actually expressing your self-ownership in that argument. So there's this a priori truth that we are somehow trying to ignore in our modern socioeconomic system of statism, where, and this is really important too, I think the word taxation gets thrown around a lot. Inflation is taxation, direct taxation is taxation, regulation is taxation, by the way, because they're increasing the cost of business, which is a revenue center for the state. Conscription is taxation, right? or slavery, if you want to call it that. They're recruiting you to go fight wars. On that spectrum of tax rate, where a 0% effective tax rate would be someone that's just self-sovereign, a 100% person under a 100% tax rate is by definition a slave.
Right.
100% of the fruits of your labor that you are extending from your self-ownership into the world go to someone else, some tax authority. Wherever you live on that spectrum, whatever your effective tax rate is, that's what percentage of a slave you are. So when I'm talking about this, it's, I think Ayn Rand put it really well, that there are no rights other than property rights. Like if you do not own yourself and you do not own the things that you create and the value you create for others in voluntary, consensual exchange, then there is no social cohesion. There's no peaceful cooperation. There's no civilization without property.
Right.
So this war on property by the state is something that's very alarming to me.
Not just that, but I mean, the World Economic Forum has come out and said by 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. So talk about a war. I mean, it's a self-declared war. They've literally put that as their marketing mantra. And so I guess there was an all-out war. And I guess the question is, on that scale from 0 to 100 in the United States, depending on what state you're in, you're over 50% of your income is going to taxes, plus an inflation rate of 20% or something like that, depending on how you want to measure that or how it affects you. Mm-hmm. But then at the end of the day, like, your assets maybe aren't ever really owned by you anyway. I mean, your property, right, as far as your land is still being taxed. Your bank accounts could be frozen or seized at any time. So if you think about it in that term, like, we're actually pretty far over on that scale. Yeah. And that's just kind of on this external property. But now, over the last year, really, and escalating even today, the war on our own body, personal, private property is just, it's an all-out war.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, let's not forget about all of the business shutdowns, this.
Right. That's private property.
The heavy-handed regulation where government has largely stepped into most businesses, depending on what state you're in, and just said you can't even operate. You can't open your doors. You can't serve people. You can't. Again, they're negating individual self-ownership. They're just saying you cannot do this in the name of safety, some obscure public safety. Not to mention all the additional regulations that are coming down the pipe. It's more expensive to travel than ever. Like we said offline, I think international travel is now suspended into the U.S. unless you prove
for non-jabbed people, period, it's suspended. Yeah, and if you are, even if you're a citizen, you have to prove that you've had a clean test. If you've taken the jab, you have to take a test within 1 day, and if you have taken it within 3 days, if you haven't taken it, you have 1 day to get it done. So that's pretty strict. And if you're not a citizen, then you can't come in. Period.
Yeah, it's very strict, and therein lies a lot of the alarm for me as well, is that this aggressiveness towards the most personal and private property we all have, which is our own body. If I zoom out on this whole thing, my general view is that the model of statism is collapsing, right? It's a model of organization based on coercion. And I think in the digital age, people increasingly have more options and are more able to resist coercion. Bitcoin being a shining example of this. If you don't like the coercion of inflation, hold Bitcoin, right? If you don't like the exit tax or something to leave your country, it's like, well, put Bitcoin in your private keys in your brain and leave. So it seems to me like the state is in decline, and in losing its relevance, it's sort of fighting to maintain or vindicate its purpose. And that fight is becoming more and more aggressive, which, as someone that aspires to be totally self-sovereign, which none of us are yet, it's alarming.
if you read, Rothbard Anatomy of the State, which is a very easy read and it's a quick read and everybody should read it. He talks about, what is the state, what isn't the state, and he talks about the goal, the purpose of the state is to continue to be a state, right? Continue to
Yes.
protect its own interest and also to continue to grow its power. Also, Frederick Bastide talks about it in The Law, and he talks about, again, right, the state. And I love how he really broke it down where he says it's all about individual rights. There is no state, right? It's all about individual rights, and it's about protecting our individual rights. And then the state is only there to help us collectively protect our individual rights. And no other rights or no other power should be attributed to them other than what we've assigned to them, which is protecting our private property rights.
Right.
And they kind of break it down, but they both, again, frame it into the sense where the goal of the state, though, is to stay in power and to continue to increase its power. And I know you're a student of history. If you look back through history and you see these decline of empires, it does seem like as they start losing, they do try to grasp on even more. So, for example, one of the last things that we see is typically something like capital control laws. And they're trying to prevent people from getting out of the currency because that only escalates the inflation or hyperinflation that they have. We've seen, obviously, China has kind of done that, capital controls, by banning all cryptocurrency there. And so there's this process of doing that. And I think maybe that's what we're seeing, just and then the more power they lose, the more they grasp, and then it kind of becomes this like escalating thing until it falls apart. Maybe.
Yeah, it's well said. The way I've described it is that the tighter governments try to grip onto citizens, the faster citizens will slip between their fingers in the digital age.
Yeah.
Because again, we have, again, just looking at Bitcoin, there's a property right you can hold that's independent of the state. No one can do anything about it. It can't be confiscated. It can't be inflated. It's a natural exit for people that are experiencing extreme bouts of state coercion, like hyperinflation or capital controls or any other form of confiscation. And so I think there's an important point here, and maybe this is an illusion that's being kind of shattered post March 2020, let's say, is that the state is just a business. Every human organization, in my view, is a business. And what I mean by this is that it's a group of people coming together to improve the bottom line of that group. Right? That's what a business is. That's what they do. Now, typically, in a free market, a business can only do this, absent coercion or violence. You can only do this by serving customers, by satisfying the wants of freely acting individuals that would voluntarily give you money for your product or service. But in the sphere of the state, they generate their revenues exclusively through coercion, compulsion, and violence. So as a business, to grow and remain relevant, you clearly have to increase the, quote unquote, services you're providing your customers.
Or the value you provide your customers.
Well, yeah, but the value here is what? There's peace, so we can trade and cooperate, so we have private property rights. When it's hard to increase that aim of increasing the value of integrity of private property rights is at odds with a revenue model, right? Because a revenue model is the violation of property rights. So this has been the conundrum of the state historically. And I think that, we saw when, like the Berlin Wall, for instance, was constructed to keep taxpayers in. There were people leaving the predatory tax regime in Germany at the time. So the wall was not built to keep people out. It was built to keep taxpayers in. And so I think that's a very interesting point. And then the state too, there's a great book on this called Seeing Like a State, where they describe how governments adopted lessons from scientific forestry to learn how to make taxpayers more legible. So this is why, for instance, they started assigning, we have social security numbers today in the US, but they started assigning citizen numbers, last names. They started mapping different parts of territory so they could know about agricultural plots and crop yields and all these things. They started to systemize taxation, which was based on lessons they got from systemizing forestry historically. But what the problem, and I think this is a problem here too, is when they the attempts at scientific forestry started to fail because they moved into much more of a monoculture. So they started planting one crop in one direction in perfect rows. They basically eliminated all of the diversity from the ecosystem. And this led to soil erosion and pest collapse. It just makes the ecosystem much more vulnerable. Yep. And I think that we've kind of gotten to that point with statism, that we've just been whittled down to, and clearly this is different for everyone, but the middle class that supports civilization has been really attacked, really heavily attacked, right? This war on entrepreneurship by the state, closing down businesses, and it's the smaller businesses that suffer, the mom and pop shops, right? It's the large businesses have actually benefited throughout all of this because they have access to cheap fiat liquidity. So it's this centralizing, destructive force on the middle class, this war on entrepreneurship, if you will, that the state is waging, that I think signals the end of statism. Like, we are really at this inflection point from the industrial age to the digital age. And I don't know what the institutions of tomorrow are going to look like, but I'm almost certain they're going to look nothing like they do today.
Yeah, all the research I've been doing into the history of cycles, going back since kind of the beginning of time, I believe that we're kind of approaching, or we're near or at a peak centralization or peak globalization. All the signs are kind of pointing to that, and that's kind of exactly what you're saying. If we go back, like you were talking about, what was interesting is like the Berlin Wall was kind of to keep the people in. When at the time when they built the Berlin Wall, what was interesting is they told, they were going to have this perfect utopian world, and it's interesting because it's like the best experiments ever been done. The same people, same education, same genetics, same everything. Split it down the middle. One side is like supposedly going to be the socialist utopian dream. They said everyone's going to have abundance. No one's going to have to work that hard. And they put the wall up and they said, we're going to keep those free market capitalists out because they're going to come and try to steal all our goods. Mm-hmm. So we're going to protect you from them, the capitalists coming to steal your stuff. But the guards on both sides of the border faced east. So the guards on the west prevented the east from coming over, and the guards on the east also kept the people in. And over the time that they were there, nobody from the free market ever tried to get in. But lots of people were killed trying to go the other way. But what's interesting about that is, well, lots of things, but they were told that we're going to put this wall up and protect you from the free market people coming in to loot you. And we're kind of at the same point today where people call it gaslighting. What you see and what you hear isn't actually what you see and hear. And that kind of goes back to 1984, War is Peace, Freedom is Slavery, et cetera. And I think we're at peak that. So the best example of this is, and there's many, but the meme, it's not a meme, the song, the phrase, the "Let's Go Brandon." And right, they were at a NASCAR event, and the girl was interviewing the driver, and people were chanting "F Joe Biden," and she's like, "Oh, they're saying let's go Brandon," and it's like everybody knew that that's not what we were hearing, but they told us that anyway, and I feel like that's like this. It's like a symbol of where we're at right now, where they're telling you what you see isn't what you hear, what you're feeling isn't true. You don't see any inflation. There's no inflation. What are you talking about? We can't achieve inflation. Meanwhile, gas is up 50% this year, right? Natural gas is up 800% in Europe. Oh, but there's no inflation. And so back to the Berlin Wall, we're doing this to protect you. But anyway, I think that's a sign of the peak centralization as well.
I agree completely. And I'll tell you, there's this quote from Nietzsche that's been ringing in my head a lot lately. And he says that everything the state has is stolen. Everything it says is a lie. Yeah. And this is not like, okay, that's quite the indictment. But I would say pre-2020, you could say that to 99% of Americans and they would think you're crazy. They think you're a crazy tinfoil hat guy or girl. But today it's not quite as crazy. I mean, it seems like maybe a third of people would kind of agree with that. And I think that the veil is just being lifted. This is a bad business model for humanity, right? The fact that we have arrogated all of this power to one organization to just have free reign with us so long as we have some semblance of private property. And again, a quick study of history, the state has always overstepped their bounds. They've always abused the trust placed in them. So it's not like this is some novel experiment we're running and we're just now figuring it out. I mean, this is, we've learned it many dozens of times. And so it seems like hopefully this time, with Bitcoin being the separation of money and state, that the state will actually be forced to be accountable to the preferences of their customers, right? This illusion we have in democracy where we can go out and cast a vote and somehow make things better, that doesn't work either, because you still have the coercion of inflation and taxation. But once you remove the monopoly of money from the state, you take money out of the state's control, I think the market sorts out the rest. So This is what we need. Like this, it's almost as if Bitcoin is the pinnacle of capitalism in some ways. Like we've had this kind of marginalized form of capitalism. We've been stumbling forward with approximations of money and property rights up until this point. And now we have something that it's a pure money, it's a pure property right, and it's a check on state coercion.
I liked what you said earlier about if you squeeze the people hard enough, they slip through your fingers or something to that effect. I was just thinking, I think of like Newton's third law, right? Every force is met with an equal and opposite reaction. So the more they squeeze, the more people push back against that. And I've said, just wait until you see what happens when millions of entrepreneurs' backs are against the wall. And I think, in spite of what the state does, the free market is still so powerful it can overcome. And, Bitcoin, obviously, Satoshi or whoever, Hal Finney and Adam Back and those guys working on it were an example of that. And I think we're continuing to see more and more stuff that enables us to kind of push back against that growing state. But moving into back to kind of that scale from 0 to 1%, 100% of being slave. I like that. And so, there's a few ways that it's done, obviously through inflation, right? They can steal our wealth, and then through taxation you talked about. So on the inflation front, the last couple of days, the interwebs have been blowing up from Jack Dorsey. He kind of kicked the hornet's nest, I guess, so to speak, when he tweeted out that we have hyperinflation coming. It's coming to the U.S. It's coming to the world, et cetera. And I want to get your take on that and kind of the response from the establishment, like Krugman, Janet Yellen came out and commented, Hanke, on that.
Yeah, I mean, Jack is a guy that's clearly a visionary and at the edge of the Overton window and extremely intelligent, big Bitcoin proponent. So he actually tweeted out a link to Anatomy of the State a few weeks ago as well. So I think he's been down the Rothbardian rabbit hole. Like he gets it. And he's right. USD hyperinflation is 100% it's coming. This is what fiat currency is designed to do, right? It's a mechanism of confiscation until it implodes. I will say it kind of reminds me of the quote that, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. So I don't know. I have my own prediction I've put out about where the dollar stands and where it will end up. I have US dollar hyperinflation occurring before 2035 in my own estimation. Could happen a lot faster. I think it's really interesting to consider how Bitcoin could accelerate that. Because an interesting thing about inflation is that you don't just need dollar production to cause it. There's a reciprocity between actually expanding the money supply and the expectations of further expansion. If enough people expect you're going to expand the money supply over a given period of time, they will sell those dollars immediately in anticipation of that inflation, creating that very loss in purchasing power. So there's a bit of this self-fulfilling prophecy dimension to it. Yeah. And I think, Jack is just telling the truth. And all of this pushback from, the quote unquote Keynesian Academy is just more propaganda. They're just trying to hold together the house of cards before it collapses.
Yeah, I mean, they're just back to, no, what you're seeing isn't real, right? Back to the let's go Brandon kind of a thing. I was working on a video for that. Did you see in Canada, they actually sent an official memo out and they told everybody that works in the government of Canada, if you say that "Let's go Brandon," then you'll be fired. So if your name's
Wow.
Brandon or your kid's name's Brandon, you can't say that anymore. And then,
Wow.
and then
Wait,
the White House put out this
you,
official press release where they got this little kid in a wheelchair. Not nothing about the kid. I mean, he was a disabled kid, poor kid. I feel bad for him, but his name was Brandon, and they had Joe Biden with him, and they're saying this little kid, Brandon, he's gonna fight so hard. We're really rooting for him. Trying to spin that, like, so now when people say "Let's go Brandon" about Joe Biden, they think they'll be referencing like that little kid in a wheelchair, and so
are
the
you
state is.
kidding me?
No, I
Wow.
tweeted it out. I said the spin doctors are out on full effect on this one. But in this research I was doing, and I was looking at the definition of hyperinflation because Hankey said it wasn't certified. So technically, I guess 50% of inflation month after month, each
Yeah.
month over time. But on Investopedia, they said hyperinflation can occur in times of war and economic turmoil in the underlying production economy. So, the war on the pandemic, there's economic turmoil. We forced all the business to close down. Nobody's working, et cetera. And turmoil in the underlying production economy. So, people didn't work, supply chains are backed up, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then in conjunction with central bank printing an excessive amount of money. So between the Fed and the Gov, they put out about $8 trillion last year. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say both of those have been met pretty well. It says hyperinflation can cause a surge in prices for basic goods such as food and fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Steaks up 20%, fuel's up 50%, natural gas up 800% in Europe, electricity's up 400%. And then it says, although hyperinflation are rare, once they begin, they can spiral out of control really fast. To your point, Bitcoin enables that to even spiral out of control faster.
I just wanted to take a second to explain to you one more time just how cool having this new BlockFi Visa credit card is. I've started to move a lot of my bills over to get paid from this. Of course, all my business supplies, I'm starting to pay for this, my advertising budgets, and I'm starting to run as much as I can through it because I'm getting paid a percentage back of every single transaction in Bitcoin. We want to save in Bitcoin because Bitcoin is an asset that goes up in value because of the deflationary nature of it. And we want to spend our fiat. So I'm spending my fiat through my BlockFi Visa card, and I'm getting back Bitcoin that I can save and I can hold. I expect it to go up in value a lot. I expect to hold my Bitcoin. I'm gonna pass it to my kids and my grandkids, and hopefully my great grandkids will have my Bitcoin one day. So I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna spend my fiat through this card, and I'm gonna earn back Bitcoin that I'm gonna save. If you wanna get one, there's a link down below.
Yes, and this is a great way perhaps to think about the relationship between Bitcoin and fiat currency is that we know that fiat currency supplies are expanded at the whim of bureaucrats. We've just seen a huge surge of expansion. The perverse thing about this too is that because the fiat currency value is being diminished through excess production, it's actually incentivizing people to take on more debt. So you're incentivized in a fiat economy to accumulate more debt. This does is create additional future demand. It does two things: creates additional future demand for dollars or units of fiat currency to satisfy those debts, and it also fragilizes the economy because your equity buffers are diminished. So anytime there's an economic shock, everyone's underwater. So fiat currency basically requires more and more. The expansion rate itself has to be increased over time. And this is that very vicious cycle we're describing where fiat currency self-annihilates. It always explodes into hyperinflation at some point. Bitcoin is like all of that turned 180 degrees opposite, right? It's quantitatively tightening over time. The new supply flow of Bitcoin is being reduced exponentially every 4 years. The incentives related to that are to save Bitcoin, to accumulate, to stash it. And so what you have is just this exponentially diminishing dollar pricing this exponentially, quantitatively tightening Bitcoin. And it's like, what else do you think is going to happen? I mean, this is why that black hole analogy is always used. It's Bitcoin is the black hole eating all the other monies. It's, not only is the price denominated in dollars going to explode as a result, which draws in a lot of attention, but the expectations get further and further out, right? We expanded the dollar supply 40% in the past 18 months, roughly. I would expect that to accelerate over the next 10 years to probably 80, 100+% per year. Whereas Bitcoin is already, I want to say, around 1% inflation rate, and that gets cut in half every 4 years. So if you understand these very basic supply and demand economics, that's all you really need to understand Bitcoin. Like there's a big rabbit hole here to understand how it works and the philosophy, all these things, but just look at supply and demand and look at the relative expansion and contraction rates of money, and that will tell you where value will flow.
Yeah. I know George Gammon tweeted out a couple times lately that normally high prices are the cure for high prices. So when prices go up, people buy less. People buy less, so the demand goes down. Also, manufacturers make more. They add more supply. So the high prices cure the high prices. But in today's market, the high prices aren't curing high prices because the prices go up, people don't care. They've dumped $8 trillion in. They just keep buying. The manufacturers, they can't provide more because inflation costs too much. They can't produce more. And so it's messed that up. Yeah. It doesn't solve that. I was thinking of something as you were just talking. I know you love to take things down into kind of first principles and natural law. And so we have laws of the universe like gravity, the law of gravity. We have the law of sowing and reaping. So you must sow before you reap, right? That's a natural law. It's in the Bible. And I think about when I was just thinking about the way you were talking about the fiat money, if we save money and then we plant it, like we sow that money, we invest it wisely, we give it to a business that can invest into R&D and capital. So we save that money like a seed, we invest it, we're sowing it, then we can reap in the future. Whereas fiat money is not that, right? So fiat money is not sowing or reaping. It's basically just stealing. It's just kind of producing this counterfeit. And just from I was just thinking about that when you were talking.
No, it's spot on. And the law of sowing and reaping is also enshrined in the Austrian literature, right? Just like we said, self-ownership is one of these a priori truths. You can't even argue with it. Like any argument you can form is secondary to the truth of self-ownership.
Right.
That same a priori knowledge structure also says production must precede consumption. You cannot consume what has not yet been produced. It is literally impossible. Exactly. There's no arguments. There's nothing to talk about. Like it just is. Yet fiat currency and the state is trying to do exactly that. They produce nothing. They just take. It's a business model built on taking. And if you get back to the Berlin Wall example, which way were people flowing, right? People were flowing towards the free market because the free market is what produces wealth. It's what enables people to engage in more consumption with less effort. Everyone with a mind and a hungry stomach, and anyone that has wants that need to be satisfied will voluntarily flow that direction. So that's another way to maybe think about the gravity of Bitcoin. Is like Bitcoin is the free market of money. Everyone will flow into it in accordance with their own self-interest. Yeah. So the fact that states are trying to plug these holes or put tape over the dam, whatever analogy you want to use, like it's just not going to hold and it's not going to work in the long run.
Going back to the state and the state trying to continue to grow its power, maintain its power. Frederick Bastide in the book The Law, he talks about legal plunder and how the government legalizes plunder or theft, right? In a bunch of different ways. Another thing I was thinking about is this week we were told by our leaders, I guess if you call them that in the United States, that now they want to tax wealth, and so they want to tax unrealized gains. And of course, it's only for the rich right now. Of course, Biden defines rich as over 400,000, and that keeps coming down, but I was thinking about taxing unrealized gains and like how rich is this where they blow up the fiat currency so much that you can't store your wealth in it. So you're forced to go buy assets. Then they print those assets even higher and then they want to tax you on the unrealized gains that you haven't even made.
Right.
I mean, talk about legal plunder. That's just insane.
It is a complete raid on wealth. And if you think the 400K mark, it sounds high to most people, but remember, they're diminishing that economic unit. So 400K today may sound and feel like a lot. In 10 years, it's going to be nothing. It'll be like
Right.
80K or 50K, who knows? So, and then to your point, they're destroying fiat currency as a store of value. So what are you going to do as a rational economic actor? You're going to buy anything they can't print, right? Real estate, gold, stocks, Bitcoin, anything. But then they're effectively pushing you into that tax bracket through inflation. So you're now going to have all these unrealized gains as a result of the inflation. You're going to be closer to the threshold, wherever they set the arbitrary threshold, because they're just diminishing the unit. So you're going to get pushed up the tax bracket, so to speak. And then they're going to tax you on gains that you have not realized. It's actually insane when you really think about it.
It's insane.
There's no liquidity there. And talk about a war on entrepreneurship. Like, imagine being a founder and going out and building a business, and then what? You create a ton of value for people. You own a huge and growing asset, and now you have to go and pay taxes on that. Like, there's early on in most businesses' life cycle, like there's not enough liquidity just to survive, much less to pay huge tax bills on unrealized gains. Like, it's going to be devastating to entrepreneurship. But I do have this sneaking suspicion that I think it's so severe that I feel like and I don't know if there's a name for this negotiation tactic where people make some completely ridiculous demand to where they can then concede just a little bit.
It's either like a drop sell technique. You give them a really high price and then you show them a low price afterwards.
Yes.
That's kind of what I call it. Or it's in negotiating, they call it, I forget what the term is, but yeah, they try to hit you with something hard and then they kind of concede a little bit.
Yes. So a drop sell, I think that's pretty much what it is they're saying something that is so ludicrous and far-fetched that I'm wondering, like, what are they trying to actually get to? What is their target concession point here? I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure it's just an increase in taxes, right? The net outcome of any of this language or illusion or deception is we need to increase taxes. I mean, that's all the state does. Once again, it's a business, right? It's out to increase its revenue. It does not care about you. No one in the state cares about you. No one. If you believe that, you need to retool your mental model of the world.
Yeah. And I mean, the whole need to increase taxes is completely broken anyway. I mean, if you took all the billionaires in the world and took all their wealth, it wouldn't pay off the debt. So like it would barely make a dent in that anyway. As you're talking about the founders, most of these really rich people, the Bezos, or whatever, or even Elon Musk, right? Like most of his wealth is held up in the stock that he owns, right? That's his company. He created, he owns it. Obviously, they would sell a lot of stock along the way to raise money and stuff like that. They could be kind of at a thin margin of keeping control over their company, and now they're forced to liquidate some of that to pay tax, and now they potentially lose control of their company or something like that. It's just insane. And also, they're paying tax. So you own that. If you pull either dividends out of that, you're paying tax on that income.
Yeah. And the C corps are paying double and triple tax, right? They're taxed at the corporate level. They're taxed at the dividend level. Some of them are taxed again at across other areas of income. It's just this business model is already insolvent. If we just look at the U.S., is totally insolvent. What is our debt to GDP? 120%.
I mean, 130-ish, right now.
130. I mean, it's done, right? You can't recover from that. So I think you're just going to see the desperation. The Biden hired 80,000 IRS agents. We're talking about this $10 trillion infrastructure package.
It's going to cost zero, though.
Of course, it costs zero. Everything costs zero when you're just stealing the money from everyone else.
But that's back to like what you see in here isn't true. So we're going to do a $3.5 trillion package and it costs zero. It's literally zero. And it's like, how is $3.5 trillion zero? But they tell you that, right? So So this is happening. So throughout history, we see this, right? So the more power the state loses, the more they squeeze to try to retain, which is natural in life. If I was losing grip on something, if I was about to fall, I would grip tighter, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
That's just natural. And we see nations continue down these paths, capital control laws, as they lose power. But then it kind of escalates the need. You know, like I talked about China. If a government tells you not to do drugs, it doesn't make you want to go do them, right? I mean, they're bad for you, whatever. But if a nation says you don't have the right to store your wealth in a way that we can't inflate away or steal from you, then it kind of makes you want to do that. And so they're almost kind of doing their own marketing, or Bitcoin's own marketing for them. What about just changing the incentive structure? So right now, and I know you're big on incentive structure. So right now, the government can just inflate away your wealth. They don't have to take anything. They don't have to tax you. Right? They can only raise taxes so high, so they'll inflate it away. They can tax unrealized wealth. They can tax it through death, right? Through transfer, things like that. But what if? Once we can hold wealth in Bitcoin, they can't just inflate it away. Obviously, they can't seize your account, freeze your account, and they're basically stuck not being able to get it. And at some point, the incentive structure switches where now they realize if I can't steal it through one of those methods, then I'm forced to actually provide you a good or a service in exchange for that.
That is the sovereign individual thesis in a nutshell, right? That governments will actually be forced to compete to add value to citizens, right? Again, I love that you pointed out the Berlin Wall thing, because I actually didn't know that all the people always flowed one direction, because that's a great little analogy for what's happening. It's like wherever you can go to have a chance at realizing the proverbial American dream, right? Of taking your self-ownership into a place with other people that are self-owned and everyone's trading to figure stuff out, and you can create wealth. People are always going to gravitate towards those circumstances. I mean, it's pretty obvious. No one wants to live under someone else's thumb. And it just seems to me that option to head that direction is becoming more obvious. I think that people, through like conversations like we're having, through all this decentralized digital media, podcasting, et cetera, people are just waking up to the reality that they live in is not what they have to live in, right? There are options, there are ways to move out and up. So I think that it's like the bursting of a dam is a rough analogy that I've used before, is that the state has kind of functioned as this dam that protected human trade and economics, but it was always just, siphoning off some of it over time. But human self-interest, which is kind of like the flowing of water, like the dam's always going to break eventually, like in the longest scope of time. And so I think that we've just reached that point where people are tired of being tired, right? People are just working nonstop for a money that's being exponentially debased. I mean, it just doesn't work, right? And the other perverse thing about this is that the state even though it's at war with entrepreneurship, it needs entrepreneurship. Otherwise, there's no tax base. If no one's trading and creating wealth, there's nothing to confiscate. So it's just this dynamic between the making of entrepreneurs and the taking of the state, which is why we always describe it as a parasite, right? It's a parasite-host relationship. Once again, the parasite has sucked too much blood, so to speak, and the host is faced with this crisis. It either dies, right? The market dies and we're all back in the Stone Age, or it finds a way to shake off the parasite or minimize the parasite and move forward. So
yeah. But in nature, the parasite doesn't want to kill the host. And it seems like the statist, they're always going to attribute any success to their policies and any negative to people that didn't follow their policies. And it's like, at least for now, they seem to be just doubling down on even more policies that are only going to continue to, exaggerate problems. And they almost should be like backing off right now if they don't want to kill the host. So
I think part of that, so just to speak, I mean, at least in the U.S., is that people, what is the old saying that every public election is an advanced auction on stolen goods? So a guy gets to go into the White House for 4 to 8 years, and he gets to make as many deals as possible, right? He's wheeling and dealing his position of power to accumulate as much wealth for himself as possible. But he has no long-term interest in the tax base. He doesn't care what happens to the nation after he leaves. He's just there to plunder for himself. So I think that's the problem, is the state doesn't, because it's a parasite that doesn't have any concern for the host, because the individual decision makers are only in there for 4 to 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So using your crystal ball, how much more time does the state have? Like, it seems like, again, just kind of, if we just kind of like overview the situation, like, prices are rising very rapidly. In some countries, obviously there's hyperinflation, whatever you want to classify that. Prices are raising at a pretty rapid rate. We're having energy crisis throughout the world. We're having supply chain constraints crisis, I would say, around the world. In a video I was working on, farmers in the U.S. were saying that if they didn't order parts or farm equipment, if they order it right now, best case scenario, they may get it the spring of 2023.
Wow. And
if you miss that spring plant in 2023, then you don't have food until 2024. But the leaders, the policymakers don't want to back down off of this. They only want to continue making it worse. Like, there's millions of people that are going to be losing their jobs now over not wanting to take the forced medications and whatnot. We got a couple more years. How long can they drag this thing out for?
I really don't know, clearly, nor does anyone. We're in unprecedented times. But I think that the funny thing about the state is that it is just an imaginary order, actually, like money or like civil rights, or it's one of these useful fictions that human beings use to organize themselves. So if we could somehow take, the perspective you and I share about the state and just implant it in everyone's mind worldwide, it would be over. The state would be over instantly. There'd be a lot of like adjustment, like what are we going to do now? How are things going to work? But there would be no more state instantaneously. Like it only has power because people believe it has power.
Right.
That's why it goes to such great lengths to uphold these deceptions and illusions to appear to be powerful. My optimism is that in the digital age, we've just opened a lot more windows, right? The windows of perception are much vaster than they were before digital media. And my hope is that the illusions of the state are just being burned away, that people are there's going to be this awakening or this transformation of consciousness where people just wake up and say, through educational efforts like this, that people will just disempower the state. You just will, and you can do this really by just moving savings into Bitcoin, right? That's the ultimate vote. There's no vote, by the way, and there's a lot of people out there that want to be like, oh, if you don't like the situation, go vote. Like, voting does nothing. Maybe it works at your local level, at a grassroots level, by all means. But if you think you're going to vote a different individual into the White House and that's going to solve anything, you're delusional.
Yeah.
So money is the vote. How you spend and how you save, that is the actual vote that energizes or devitalizes institutions. And so when you hold your savings in Bitcoin, you're casting a vote against the state that cannot be muted. You're just saying, I'm going to hold my property in something that the state cannot prey on. And when you do that, it just makes them a little more desperate, and they're going to grip a little bit tighter. And then a few more people are going to escape into Bitcoin. And that's the virtuous cycle, I think, that unwinds the vicious cycle of fiat currency and property right violations.
Yeah. I think it depends on where you put your focus, but I think it's, on one hand, it's very scary to see that half the world appears to be sleepwalking, happy to assign their thinking to somebody else and just follow blindly what the experts, whatever the so-called experts, have to say. That's really scary. But on the other side, I'm actually super encouraged because there's a ton of people like you and I creating content. I mean, I've reached over 20 million people just on my YouTube channel alone that are people that are curious, people that have that inspiration to go out and learn. And so while one half of the world might be sleepwalking, other half are waking up, and it only takes a small percentage to kind of have this revolution. And I think we're there. And at least finally we have the tool to actually do something about it.
Yeah.
So
I love the quote that I've been repeating a lot lately, but I'll say it again. It was from H.G. Wells. He said, civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. So I think what you're doing, it's a noble cause, and it's one that I've even tried to take up recently myself to try and speak more about this. Whereas before I was kind of living behind the curtain, trying to, run a hedge fund and be a privately wealthy guy. I was like, no, this is bigger than all of that. Like, there may not be anything left if we don't wake up enough people. So
there is no higher purpose. Not right now. Nothing more urgent.
Absolutely.
Cool. With that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I know you've, you create so much good content. You have the What is Money show on YouTube and on the podcast. We'll make sure to link that down below. Anything else you want to draw any attention to?
No, man, I really appreciate you having me. I've launched a newsletter. Actually, it's not. I hate the word newsletter though, because I don't talk about the news at all. It's just more a way to subscribe to my writing. It's called the Freedom Analects. There's links to that on my Twitter page.
Cool.
And I'm just trying to explore these ideas. Like, what if statism does fail? Where do we go next? So, yeah.
Cool. All right. With that, we're going to sign it off. Thanks so much, Robert.
Thanks, Mark.